Welcome to JonGetsGames. Today I'll be reviewing Indian Summer. This game was designed by Uwe Rosenberg, and the idea of this game is you're going for a nice autumn walk, and you'll be placing down these Tetris-shaped pieces down onto your player board that are covered in leaves. Every single one of these tiles has a hole in them, and if you arrange them just right, then various woodland creatures might pop through and give you some bonuses. This game is a race, and I will first explain how it plays in a little more detail, and then I'll jump into my review. Here we have the game fully set up and ready to play. Each player has a backpack, and in it they have these 5 different leaf tiles. They start always with 2 green, 2 yellow, and 1 red, and then they go into their first turns. And on a player's turn, it's pretty simple. They just take one main action, and there are 2 of these options for you on your turn. The first is you could choose any of the tiles that are in your backpack. You don't have to go with a specific order, and then you put it out anywhere onto your board. So for instance, we could take this tile right here, and you'll notice it does have this hole in the middle of it. And that means that if we were to put it out on our board just like this, we will now have this little blue blueberry symbol showing up in the hole. When we come down to take a closer look, it is worth pointing out that this is also a legal placement. You don't have to have these treasures showing up in the hole, but it's usually a good thing to do that because the moment you place this down with the treasure right there, you're going to take one of these tokens and you're going to put it right on top of the hole to show that these berries are something that we will be able to collect later on in the game, but we don't have access to them just yet. With that single normal action done, our turn is now complete. We can go ahead and shift things over in our backpack and play goes on to the next player. So once it comes back around to us, we can take another turn, and the other standard main action option is we can instead grab one of this big pile of squirrels, and you'll notice that all of these are just one by one tile locations, and you can put this down somewhere on the board just like that if you want to. Obviously, this is not a great move for the earlier parts of the game, but it's always an option for you to do on your turn. Players will keep taking turns clockwise around the table as they slowly fill up their forest area more and more from the tiles that are over here in their backpack. They can go ahead and fill these things in, and there will come a moment where they're going to take one of their tiles and they'll place it down on the board in such a way that they will have completed one of these regions on the board. You'll see it split up into 6 of these regions. Now, the moment you go ahead and complete one of these regions, that is when you get to harvest all of the treasures that are currently sitting on top of the holes on your tiles. So the moment we finish this, we could take all 3 of these berries, put them into our supply, and they are now usable for us. Whenever a player grabs their last tile from the backpack and puts it out onto the board, they are then going to immediately refill their backpack up to 5 different slots, and you start by pulling these tiles from around the central board. You have this little bush tile that shows you where you're going to start, and you'll just go ahead and take them, putting them in this specific order into your backpack until you have 5 of them left. And then you can scoot this bush down, and once the bush gets to a point where there are only 7 of these tiles left over, we're going to go ahead and reach into this big box of new tiles and refill more onto this overall path. At this point, you may be wondering what all of these animal tiles are for. They match the similar shapes to the leaf tiles, but they are a free action to put down onto your board with a couple restrictions. The first is they must go down on top of the leaf tiles. They can never go onto this main board. And the second, more important restriction is they can only go on top of the empty holes in the tiles that you've already placed down. So that means if one of these treasure tokens is still over one of the holes, then it's going to restrict the ability for an animal to go onto that spot. So in this instance, we just cleared out these holes right here. So we could go ahead and take this angle tile. It's got a couple birds on it, and that pattern matches the pattern of the holes on this area. You go ahead and put this down and immediately reevaluate any of the treasure tokens that are, treasure spots that are underneath it. So we see that this is going to cover up 2 of the blueberries, which means we're going to go ahead and take 2 more blueberries from the supply and put them into our area for placing this animal tile down. And now we can still go ahead and take a main action for our turn. It's also worth noting that there is a limited supply of these animals, and these 3 in particular come with a bonus treasure tile. If you do this badger right here, it will come with a feather, this fox will come with a nut, and these raccoons will come with another berry automatically just for placing them down onto your board. At this point, I'm sure you are very curious as to what these treasure tokens do, and if you flip over your backpack, you will notice that it has a little example of what all 4 of them are, and the top 2 are free actions. The first is the berry, and it says that you can go ahead and spend one of these berries in order to gather new leaves from the main forest line. So if you already have 5 in your area, that means you can go ahead and take a 6th and put it into your backpack, but you can never go on to a 7th. Or if you're in a situation where maybe you only have 3 tiles available to you and you really like the next couple that are in line that you might want to play on this turn, you can go ahead and spend that berry in order to take the next ones until you're once again maxed out at 5.
The next option is the nut, and this one is quite simple. If you look right over here, it says you can discard a nut in order to put a squirrel down anywhere onto your player board. So this nut can go away as a free action. You can place a squirrel down, and then you can continue to go ahead and do more free actions or do your main action. This can be really nice when it comes to actually finalizing one of these areas to unlock some of the treasures that you then might want to use later on in the turn that you are currently playing. Next up, we have the mushroom action right here. And in fact, this one and the feather are supplementary main actions. They are not free actions, so you can do one of these instead of the main action on your turn. And the mushroom lets you take the tile that is closest to the backpack on two of your opponents and immediately place those into your area. So this is pretty much the main way that you're going to be interacting with your opponents. You can get rid of these mushrooms to play their tiles, but it's also the main reason why you have to put these tiles into your backpack in order, because it's only the leftmost tile or the one that's closest to your backpack that is in jeopardy from an opponent potentially grabbing it with a mushroom. If you are playing a two-player game, then you're just going to take the one from your opponent and the tile that is closest to the bush in this main line. And this brings us to the last of the treasure options, which is the feather. And this one simply lets you play two of your own leaf tiles from your backpack out onto your player area. There is one last thing that you could do with your treasure tokens, and you can see this chart that's printed out on the main area. And this shows that you can spend 2 berries to immediately turn them into a nut, 2 nuts turn into a mushroom, 2 mushrooms turn into a feather, and you can always downgrade them as well. So any feather could be turned into a mushroom and used for that, or down into a nut or a berry. So if you're in a really desperate situation, a feather can be used as any of the different types, and this changing process is a free action for you on your turn. So play is going to continue around the table with players taking one main action on their turn, which again is going to be either a leaf from the backpack, a squirrel out onto the board, or a mushroom or feather action from their pool of treasures. And they're going to keep going until one player has finished out their entire board, covering up every single spot. This is a race game, and when that happens, play is going to continue around the table until you reach the person to the right of the start player, which is denoted by these little boots right here. And at that point, players are then going to use this conversion table to make as many nuts as possible, and they will immediately spend all of those nuts in order to place squirrels down onto their board. If they're able to complete a new region by putting these squirrels down, they could gather more of these treasure tiles that they could then convert into more nuts and try to complete this board as much as possible. Once everybody has done this nut to squirrel conversion, you will see if more than one player has maybe filled out their board, then whoever has the most nuts is going to win, or if just one person was able to complete their area, then they are the winner of the game.
Let's now begin the review for Indian Summer by starting with a couple positive points. And the first of these has to do with the big new idea that this game brings to the Tetris-style puzzle laying genre, and that is that every one of the base tiles that you put down that are covered in leaves also has a hole in it. So not only are you trying to match your tiles so that they fill in all those holes in the perfect way, and many of these tiles are very goofy shapes like several other of this style of game that Uwe Rosenberg has designed, but also knowing where that hole is going to really dictate how you're going to place those tiles down. Maybe it fits perfectly just like this, but the hole is in a terrible location. So you instead flip it over and put it in a very strange orientation on your map that'll be hard to fill in, but it puts the hole in the tile right over that bonus that you really need, that's right next to those other holes, so that you could perfectly match it up so that you can have one of the animals burst up through the leaves and give you even more bonuses. I just think it's a really wonderful idea, trying to have this puzzle game within a puzzle game when it comes to orienting the holes out on your board. Positive number 2 is a pretty simple one. I think that this is a really good-looking game when it's out on the table. You have the leaf tiles with all the different changing color leaves on them, and then you have all of the animals, which I think are wonderfully illustrated, and I think it's great that they burst up through the holes in the leaf tiles that you've put out onto the map. I think that as you're playing this game, just the overall aesthetic of it is very well done, and I even like that the bonus little tokens, you can have a kind of a easy-to-read side, and you flip it over and it has an artistic side, so that when you put that down onto your force floor before you have claimed it, it kind of matches the overall aesthetic of everything you have going in front of you. I'm not saying I necessarily feel like I'm going for a nice autumn stroll as I'm playing this game, but it definitely matches that beautiful idealized version of what a stroll like that might be like if there was a lot of animals running about. Next up, we have the neutral section, but I only have one I want to cover here, and it has to do with the restrictions on tile laying, in particular, how lax those restrictions are in this game. In particular, I'm comparing this one to Patchwork and to Cottage Garden. Both are similar games that were by the same designer. And in Patchwork, you only have 3 tiles available to you that you can choose from ever. And in Cottage Garden, you have up to 4 potentially as you're kind of moving this thing around the map, but those are quite restrictive, and based off of what your opponents do, you might not have access to other ones. But in Indian Summer, you have your own personal little backpack of leaves, I guess, and you can pick any of them that you want to put out onto your area, which means it's very low stress. You don't have to worry about other people denying you these leaves. Beyond the mushroom, I guess that is one thing to keep in mind, is that your leftmost tile can be stolen by an opponent by a mushroom action to put onto their board. So that's really the only thing you're considering, is like, do I want that one to be something that if I want that one, maybe I should play it right now. But if I do that, it'll unlock this other one, and maybe that's good for one of my opponents. But this is a very low impact type of thing. Like in general, it's a low stress picking environment, which means it's also a low tension picking environment. And for some people, they will actually like that. I mean, the overall aesthetic of the game is a nice walk through the leaves. But for other people like me, I miss some of that tension. I feel like the game needed a bit more to make me feel a little bit more attached to the overall gameplay and the decisions I was making. All right, it's now time to cover a couple negative points, and the first one is a little bit expansive. It touches on several things, so I'll start off by saying that I feel like the bonus tokens that you gather throughout the game are too abundant and a little too flexible with how you can move them back and forth between each other by converting. Now, you're going to be gathering these tokens by finishing out one of the 6 little regions on your player board. The moment it's filled in, you're going to take all the bonus tokens on the various holes in your leaves and put them into your supply. And then later on, if you have matched the holes up so that it fits one of the animals, they can pop through and generate even more of these tokens for you. And what I've found is that by the mid-game, players often have many tokens in front of themselves, kind of from turn to turn. And I know that the rules say, you know, this is a race game, you shouldn't hoard your tokens, you should spend them. But it oftentimes feels like you have so many of them that you almost can't spend them fast enough, or certainly spend them in a good way fast enough. And so that kind of desensitizes me to the fun of the tokens. Like if they were a more precious resource, if they showed up less often, I'd be much more interested in trying to figure out how to activate them, as opposed to at many times throughout the game, kind of feeling like I have access to whatever I want to by converting up and down, or just using some of the ones I have in front of me. I was so dissatisfied with this that I actually played one of my games with a variant that I came up with. Because not only do I think there's too many of these, but I think it devalues the animals and the holes that you're trying to put out on the board in specific arrangements. I feel like that idea is the best part of this game, and it is unfortunate that you have to finish a arbitrary 1/6 of your board to pull those tokens off to make those holes empty so that you can now bring an animal on. So I played the game, the last time I played the game, I got rid of that scoring entirely. I just made it so that whenever you put a tile down and it had a hole over one of the scoring tokens, you didn't do anything. You just left it there, and it was a potential bonus that you could gather later on if you pulled an animal through that spot. So as opposed to an animal being a second activation of that bonus, the animal was the only way to activate that bonus. I thought this might bring in some tension to the game, make the tile placements a little bit more interesting, and certainly make the tokens a lot less abundant. And it worked. Like, I think it was actually a better game with my variant, like taking out that 1/6 area scoring. It made prioritizing the shapes for the holes much more interesting for the animals, but it certainly did not fix the game. I feel like the game needed a different design aesthetic. Like, I feel like that was a good way to start for house ruling the game, but it did not fix everything. And I don't think it's something I necessarily advise other people to do. I just think that that whole aspect of the game is convoluted. It's kind of slapped on. It's the most complicated part of the game to actually teach. And I feel like it's not even necessary. Like, I do think the game was better with my variant, even though I don't think it fixed the overall game experience. So that is my kind of strange, rambling negative number 1. Now, moving on to negative number 2, something I have noticed is rather anticlimactic endings to the game. And in particular, I am talking about my first 2 plays of the game, not the variant play, because obviously that is a huge asterisk, but those other games where I played it with the rules as written. I found that, first of all, you could kind of tell when somebody was in the lead and they were doing very well, but you also definitely get into situations where you can no longer fit any of your tiles in, and all you're doing every turn is putting a squirrel in, which means you can look down and you're like, well, I win in 6 turns because I have 6 holes, so once a turn, I'm smacking a squirrel down. Maybe you have liquidated all of your tokens to get nuts so that you can squeeze all those squirrels in there right at the end. But it just, the ending has never felt climactic in any way, shape, or form, honestly. It's been kind of, there's never been tension with it, and it's not fun when you have done all the cool stuff and you just have this kind of weird shape, and maybe it's your fault that you have a weird shape left over, but it just, for the rest of the game, you're just like putting in a squirrel, putting in a squirrel, putting in a squirrel, and you can oftentimes math it out, look to see what everybody else has, and figure out if you're going to win or lose. So that lack of tension with the end game is definitely a detractor. Okay, let's now move on and discuss the variability that comes in with Indian Summer. And I feel like it's less than I was expecting going in. I mean, this is a light game. My expectation was not for extreme variability from one play to the next, but I have found that every time I play this game, it really did feel like I was playing the same game I played last time. Like there's no like heavy animal strategy or blitz strategy or like different ways that one game feels different from the next. It just kind of feels like you're doing the same race with the same decision set, especially with the kind of loose way that you can kind of gather the tiles and play the tiles from your backpack, meant that I was expecting a bit more variability, maybe not a lot, I mean, because this is a light game, so you have to go in with not gigantic variability expectations, but I was a little disappointed by what the game actually provided. When it comes to player counts, Indian Summer supports 1 to 4 players, and I don't generally cover solo gaming, so I'm not going to talk about the 1 player at all, but I did play the 2, 3, and 4, and I think that 3 is probably best, 2 was okay, and 4 was also good. The reason that 2 was not as good as the rest is particularly the mushroom action that lets you play 2 different tiles from 2 opponents. Well, in a 2-player game, you only have 1 opponent, which means you also play 1 tile from the middle ring, which is slightly less interactive and therefore slightly less interesting. And also, since it's a race game, if your opponent is just very far ahead of you, I don't know, it seems less interesting. I mean, there's not a whole lot you could do to actually hold an opponent back, but if you're in a 3-player experience and they have really good tiles, then maybe 2 of you can keep mushrooming to grab the really good tiles to kind of slow them down, versus in a 2-player game, you have less opportunities to do that. But if I'm being honest, I say that 3-player is best, but it's fine at all of those player counts. Like it's not a huge lead for one or the other. 4-player was okay as well. I guess maybe downtime was a bit bigger, but there wasn't that much downtime in this game because honestly, there was not that much overall to think about from turn to turn. In conclusion, I've played Indian Summer 3 times at this point, and I've been pretty disappointed. I have quite enjoyed several of Uwe Rosenberg's other Tetris-style tile-laying games, like Patchwork, Cottage Garden, and Feast for Odin. I really thought Patchwork was great. I thought Cottage Garden was fine. I only played it once. I would totally play it again. Nobody has a copy of it, and I haven't felt gravitated towards grabbing it. But with Indian Summer, I am definitely just very much over it after 3 plays. I feel like it's just fluff. There's not enough really there to engage me as I'm playing the game. Like at least in Cottage Garden, which was less engaging than Patchwork, but at least you had the restrictions of where the marker was going to be on each round. You could plan ahead to be like, okay, this round I got this one, next round I'll do this one, and next round maybe I'll have that one. Sure, an opponent might take 1 or 2 of them, but you can plan ahead with that kind of stuff. And you can plan ahead in Indian Summer. It just, the planning isn't very interesting. You know, you have this backpack, you can take the leaves out in any order you want to. You will probably always have a berry available to you, so you can spend the berry to fill your backpack in with more of the leaves that are out in the middle of the table. It just, none of that really ended up being compelling. I felt like this game was definitely less than the sum of its parts, which is unfortunate because I really like that idea of having all of the tiles have a hole in them. Like, I think that's a really neat new idea to this overall genre, and I think that if the design had really focused on that as opposed to having it almost feel like a side idea where, yeah, okay, I guess, you know, especially with the animal matching, well, like, okay, you know, you can get a reactivation, you get another one of those bonus tokens. That just, it feels like that's where the game should have been. Like the design should have been focused around aligning those circles up so that you can get those animals, have them pop through, maybe have that be more impactful to the overall game. Maybe not have the game be a race, maybe have it be worth victory points for the various types of animals that you can have pop through the leaves. But as the game is, you know, getting an animal or 2 is like a nice bonus. It just adds to your growing pile of tokens. And at the end of the game, you just have this big sea of leaves in front of you. And I just feel like the design went awry at some point, and maybe maybe they focused too much on trying to have this be a relaxing, low-stress environment because the theme of it is a relaxing autumn walk through the leaves as they kind of fall on the ground. But that also means that they missed the mark on having something actually be interesting. Like, going for walks is relaxing, but not an interesting endeavor. And usually when I sit down to play a game, I want to do something that's going to activate my mind and interest me, as opposed to just be so relaxing that I figure, you know what, I may as well actually just go out and go for a walk as opposed to playing this game again. So I cannot recommend this one. I feel like there potentially was a really great light tile laying game in here at some point in the development process, but they just went away from it, and that's not what we end up getting in the box. As always, I'd like to thank everyone who's been supporting my channel through Patreon, including all of these producer level pledges. If you too would like to directly support the channel, you could do so at patreon.com/JonGetsGames, and I'd really appreciate it. Also, if you'd like to see more in-depth board game reviews like this one, as well as full game playthroughs and vlogs, please subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching.